Hey, what's up, guys? This is Benny Ricciardi with rotocurve.com, and I'm here with our DraftKings MLB Benny's Bats section for Friday, April 8th. We have a pretty nice slate tonight. We're going to be talking about the night slate, so only the last 10 games that are starting at 7 p.m. tonight. There is a small 4-game slate that's starting this afternoon that if you need some information on, go over to the rotocurve.com website. There's some people talking about it in chat probably, and they'll also have all the tools that Josh Kalachi puts up there. You know, some really good stuff about, hitters and ballparks and matchups and everything that you can look for before you're trying to put your lineups together. So make sure you get over to rotocurve.com. Remember, sign up for an account. It's free. It doesn't cost you anything. And there's a lot of useful information over there that'll help you be a profitable daily fantasy player. Now, what we're going to do here, the idea of our Benny's Bats section is we go through each pitcher that's on the mound. We try to figure out what that pitcher's weakness is and then which batter's profile to do the best against them. So let's start right at the top with that Tampa Bay and Baltimore game. We got Chris Archer going for Tampa Bay. Now, Archer's been very good. He's a high strikeout guy. Last year, he only allowed about a 220 batting average to both sides of the plate. So lefties, righties, nobody really hit him all that hard. It's a very, very solid matchup for him. Now, it's not a very good pitcher's park. Baltimore, Camden Yards is a good place for hitters. And there's a couple guys that do profile well in righty-on-righty matchups. The two guys that stick out are Chris Davis and Manny Machado. Davis had a 410 WOBA, 350 ISO. Those are huge numbers. Now, I don't normally like to pick on a pitcher like Archer, who's pretty good. But if you're looking for a tournament play that might be low-owned and has some upside, Chris Davis, especially coming off of the bad game he had last night when he was very highly owned after some of the late scratches and, the rain delays, I think he might be somebody you could look at in the tournament. Machado the same way. Machado home run last night. A guy that had a 380 WOBA last year, ISO score in the 200s. Again, I'm not trying to pick on Archer, but if you are going to do it, those are the two guys that I would look at. On the other side of that game, we have Chris Tillman. Left-handed bats hit 262 against him with a 1.41 whip, and right-handed bats actually hit a little higher at 271 last year with the 1.33 whip. He did give up 17 home runs in 87 innings to right-handed bats, so that's something else to consider. Maybe that puts a guy like a Logan Forsythe or, an Evan Longoria in play, but they're not really great in righty-on-righty matchups. The one guy who does hit right-handed pitching well on that team is the man they brought over from Colorado, Corey Dickerson. 398 WOBA, 280 ISO score for him last year. But I'm still on the fence about Dickerson because, remember, he played in Coors Field last year, so we know that those numbers are somewhat inflated. Now, how inflated they are is another story. Is he still a 370 250 ISO kind of guy outside of Coors Field? I'm not really sure yet. I think that the Coors Field numbers are have bumped him up a little bit. He is hitting cleanup in that Tampa Bay order and, good hitters ballpark in Baltimore, going up against a guy in Tillman who did give up a decent amount of home runs last year. So I think Dickerson is probably the best option that I'd look at for the Tampa Bay Rays in this game. Now, moving on to the next game, we have Boston against Toronto. Toronto's throwing Marcus Stroman, the young right-hander. Limited sample size on him, but he's been very good in the innings that we have seen him pitch over the last couple of years. He's a little bit weaker against right-handed pitchers in righty-on-righty matchups, but you would expect lefties to do a little bit better than they have against him. The only guy that really stands out on the numbers for me on that Boston team is Big Papi David Ortiz. 413 WOBA, 300 ISO score against right-handed pitching. They're playing in Toronto. Very good ballpark for hitters. A lot of home runs get hit in Toronto. Definitely somewhere that I think, David Ortiz should be one of those guys, at the very least, that you're putting on a couple of your tournament rosters if you're somebody who rolls out, more than one roster out there. On the other side of that game, it was supposed to be Rick Porcello, but since that game got rained out yesterday, I'm pretty sure Joe Kelly's going to be the pitcher now. Now, Kelly, this is really not a good spot for Kelly. He had a 299 batting average allowed to right-handed bats last year, with a whip of 1.62, and he gave up 10 home runs in 63 innings, so about a homer every 6 innings. He's going up against that Toronto offense, which is one of the best ones we have in the league. They do hit pretty well against right-handed pitching. I know we like them better against lefties, but, they've knocked around right-handers as well. Encarnacion, 399 WOBA, 294 ISO. Joey Batista, 395 WOBA, 301 ISO. Donaldson's got a big WOBA and ISO. Tulo's got a big WOBA and ISO. Even a guy like Chris Colabello was like 365 last year with, an ISO over 200. So there's a lot of power. There's a lot of guys in this lineup that you can look at. I think the Blue Jays are going to be one of the better stacks. Remember, they're at home in Toronto. Toronto is basically the Coors Field of the American League, so that's something to keep in mind. With the Coors game being in the early slate, I think there's going to be a lot of exposure to people in the late slate to this Toronto lineup, and I don't think it's a bad idea. I mean, you're going to get some big scores out of some of these guys. You also have some big prices out of them, though, so it's not very easy to fit them all in. Next game we want to talk about, Pittsburgh at Cincinnati. Francisco Liriano was lights out in his first start. Went 6 innings, struck out 10, didn't give up any runs. Right-handed bats tend to hit him a little better, but they're still not good against him. It's 228 average last year, 122 ISO score. So if you really want to look at some guys, I mean, maybe Zach Cozart leading off. He had a 384 WOBA, 239 ISO score against left-handed pitching last year. So he's a decent play. Joey Votto is actually somebody who does good in lefty-on-lefty matchups as well. 436 WOBA, 211 ISO. I actually haven't checked his BVP against Liriano. Being in the same division, I'm sure these guys have faced each other a bunch. So it might be something you guys want to take a look at beforehand. I'm not really looking to roll Votto out here because there are some other first basemen who I like, but it could be a sneaky play, especially if Liriano has high ownership. Usually when a pitcher is highly owned, the bats that are going up against them are ones that people shy away from. Could be a good way to get a low-owned guy in a tournament here that, does hit left-handed pitching well and does well in lefty-on-lefty matchups. Now, on the other side of that game, Alfredo Simon is somebody that I really do want to target against. Left-handed bats at 289 against him with a 1.54 whip and 16 home runs in 106 innings. The problem I have here is there's not a lot of guys that really profile well against him on that Pittsburgh team. You probably have John Jaso leading off, 360 WOBA for him last year against weak right-handed, well, against all right-handed pitching, but definitely a good spot against a weak right-handed pitcher like Simon. Again, he doesn't have a ton of power, but he is somebody who can get you some hits. Gregory Polanco is probably the guy who profiles best. He's off to a decent start to the year. Left-handed bat, hits right-handed pitching really well, has some speed, has some power. I don't like the fact that he's hitting like 6th in that order. I would really like to see him up in like the 2 or 3 hole, probably the 2 hole with, McCutchen hitting 3rd. And then McCutchen is the other guy, even in a righty-on-righty matchup, 376 WOBA, 200 ISO score. So he's somebody that hits pretty well against righties. And Simon is one of the weaker pitchers on the mound today. I think that game is in Cincinnati. Let me double check on that. Yeah, that game is in Cincy. So it's a good hitter's ballpark, a place where a lot of home runs fly out of. Definitely somebody I think you can look at there with McCutchen and Polanco and Jaso probably being the 3 guys that I would really want if I'm going after Simon today. Next game we can talk about, St. Louis at Atlanta. Now we have Jaime Garcia pitching for St. Louis. He's a guy that I really like. I don't like using him in daily fantasy because I don't think he has the strikeout upside, but he's somebody that has almost a 3-to-1 ground ball to fly ball ratio, which means that basically everybody just hits weak ground balls through the infield against him. And that's good for fantasy. He doesn't usually get lit up for a lot of runs because he doesn't give up a lot of home runs. He keeps the ball on the ground. He gets a lot of outs. He gets a lot of double play balls, which is all good things in real life. It's all bad things in fantasy for the offense that's going up against them. But for the price that you have to pay, I think his strikeout numbers are going to be a little bit low. So I'm probably not on him, but I'm also not really on anybody on Atlanta. He is a little bit worse against left-handers, despite being a lefty. He does have a little bit of a reverse split thing going. But again, he's been good to both sides of the plate. So it's not like it's a 300 average versus 200 average or something like that. So I guess if you want to use anybody on Atlanta, Freddie Freeman is probably the best guy to look at. But again, I'm not really looking to roll anybody out. This game is in Atlanta. Not a very good hitter's ballpark. Definitely not a place that I want to take too many bats. I think you can target some bats on the other side of this game, though. Matt Whistler, the young the young right-hander for Atlanta, really struggled with left-handed bats last year. They had 327 against them. They had a whip of 1.97, and they had 10 home runs in 48 innings. So a home run in better than every 5 innings. The guys that stand out to me on this St. Louis team, Matt Carpenter, obviously, you guys know if you listened to the show last year, I'm a big Matt Carpenter fan. He is a great cash game play. Hits on top of that order. 394 WOBA, 249 ISO score last year against right-handed pitching. He hits on top of the order. He gets you, a hit or a walk. He can hit a double or 2. He flashed a little bit of power last year, although that's not really his game. It's not really something I would count on. But because he hits on top of that order, he does score a lot of runs too. And he's a consistent 8 to 15 fantasy points over on DraftKings and this year on FanDuel as well. just about every game that he rolls out there. So he's a great cash game play, somebody that I'm definitely going to have some exposure to. Really like the lefty-righty matchup, picking on Whistler with the left-handers. I also think you can look at Colton Wong, another guy who hits right-handed pitching well. And then cleanup hitter Brandon Moss, I think, is in a sneaky spot here as well. Left-handed batter, hits right-handed pitching very well, has a little bit of power. Very, very good profile of a guy who should do well against a pitcher like Matt Whistler. So I think Brandon Moss is another guy there. So not opposed to running in a stack of St. Louis Cardinals today. Although, again, I think there are some better spots, and it's not the greatest hitter's ballpark. But I do think that you'll get these guys at pretty decent ownership, and I think they have a very, very good matchup against Whistler. Next game I want to talk about is Houston at Milwaukee. We got Chase Anderson going up for Milwaukee in this game. Left-handed bats hit 262 against them last year with a 136 whip. Right-handed bats actually hit 280 with a 1.24 whip. So looking at that Houston team, there are actually two guys that I want to target today. I love Carlos Correa. He is the best shortstop in baseball, bar none. It's not even an argument. I don't care that it's his second year in the league. This guy is a stud with the bat in his hand. 360 WOBA last year, 209 ISO in righty-on-righty situations. Already hit a couple home runs in righty-on-righty situations this year. Jacked a couple at a Yankee Stadium, which is not easy for right-handed batters to do all the time. Really like Correa. Also really like George Springer, who's hitting in front of him in that lineup. You get those guys towards the top of the order. Altuve is a decent option for a couple hits, but he's very expensive. I usually like to use him more against left-handed pitching, but I do like the guys behind them. Springer and Correa, I think, are both in play today. Good hitters ballpark, too. They're in Milwaukee. A lot of home runs fly out of Milwaukee. That's why I like the guys with a little more power here. On the other side of that game, you got Scott Feldman, the right-hander, going up for Houston. He had a pretty high batting average allowed to both lefties and righties last year. My biggest problem here is there are not a lot of bats on Milwaukee I want to target. Ryan Braun is obviously in play. He's always in play. Very good hitter there. Scooter Gannett, maybe, that's what I'm saying. After Ryan Braun, it gets a little bit dicey. Scooter's probably my second favorite play. Left-handed bat that does very well against right-handed pitching. Hopefully he's hitting up in the order. If he's hitting second in the order like he did the other day, I think that puts him in play. If he's still hitting in the 5 or 6 hole, I'm not as likely to play him, although he is still cheap on a lot of places. So you can still get him, and he does still make a little bit of sense if you're looking for a salary saver. Next game we want to talk about, we got Minnesota going up against Kansas City at Kansas City. Not a great place to hit. Not a lot of home runs go out of that ballpark. Yordano Ventura is pitching for Kansas City. Left-handed bats have really been the way to go after him. Gave up a 255 batting average with a 135 WOBA to left-handers last year. The only left-hander that really scares me even a little bit on Minnesota is Joe Mauer. I know he just jacked out a home run either last game or the day before, but he's not really a huge power threat here. Other than him, you got a ton of right-handed bats up there on the top of the order. Guys like Dozier, guys like Sano. Trevor Plouffe is another one. Miguel Sano is somebody who does hit well in righty-on-righty situations, so he might be worth a look too. But again, at Kansas City against that very good defense in a ballpark that's not really conducive to hitting home runs, don't really think I want to roll any of these Minnesota bats out there against Ventura. Now, on the other side of that game, we have Irving Santana, right-handed pitcher, struggled a little bit against left-handed bats last year. 260 batting average, 1.4 whip. So left-handers did get on base quite a bit against them. A couple guys you can look at on that Kansas City team. Kenjus Morales, 385 WOBA, 254 ISO. And he always goes lower owned than he should because he's first base eligible, and so is Eric Hosmer. So if you are looking at Kansas City bats, you usually have to make a decision between the two. I like both of them today. I mean, Hosmer hit 378 with a 192 ISO, 378 WOBA with a 192 ISO score against right-handed pitching as well. So I do think that both of those guys are in play, but I think you're going to get Morales at much lower ownership. So for a tournament, I think I like him better, and his numbers are actually even a little better. So if I was going to use either one of them at first in cash, I think Morales is the guy that I really want today. Mike Moustakas, another guy you can look at if you're looking for a somewhat cheaper third base option. Again, I don't love the ballpark, but I do think it's a pretty good matchup for him. Left-handed bats going up against Irving Santana. Next game we're going to talk about here, we got the Chicago Cubs at the Arizona Diamondbacks. Jason Hamill is pitching for the Cubs here. Right-handed bats hit 249 against them last year with a whip of only 110, so not that great. But he did give up 16 home runs to right-handed bats in 95 innings pitched. So basically a home run every 6 innings. The two guys that I'm really looking to target here, like we said, with the home run power with the right hand, I think Goldie's in play. He did have a 408 WOBA with a 247 ISO score in righty-on-righty situations last year. Let's face it, I mean, this guy's one of the best hitters in the league, arguably the third best hitter, as most season-long players will tell you, behind Mike Trout and behind Bryce Harper. He was basically the third overall pick in most drafts if he didn't go ahead of one of those two guys, which I think is a little crazy, but there are people who I've heard made a case for it. Also think you got to look at David Peralta. He's been hitting really well. Last year had a 397 WOBA, 228 ISO score against right-handed pitching. He likes hitting against the right-handers. And then the other guy that I think you have to give a little bit of a look to, Gene Segura is off to a really hot start. Hit 2 home runs last night, one of them out of the park. One of them was an inside the parker on that play where, Schwarber got hurt and ran into, one of the other outfielders out there. But Segura's been putting up good numbers. He's at the top of that order, has some really big bats behind him, guys like Goldie and Peralta and Castillo all hitting behind them. So I think he's in a pretty good spot today. Those would be the 3 guys that I look to roll out against Hamels. Good hitters ballpark there in Arizona. So I do think we'll see some runs there, just like we did last night. For the other side of the game, Arizona's throwing up Robbie Ray, young left-handed pitcher. He had some good starts and some bad starts last year, but right-handed bats have usually been a way to attack him. Last year they hit 252 with a 1.38 whip, but he's not a guy that gives up a lot of home runs. So, you may not get a lot of home run power out of him. Looking at that Cubs team, they did go out and get a couple guys. They did not hit left-handed pitching well last year, so they did go out and get some guys who can help them there. Zobrist and Dexter Fowler are both guys that have 375 WOBAs against left-handed pitching. So I think those two guys are going to be in play from the right side. And Rizzo in a lefty-on-lefty matchup actually has a 383 WOBA last year with a 178 ISO. So not a lot of power that he flashed last year in lefty-on-lefty matchups, but he was still ripping the ball. He was still getting some hits. He was still getting on base. So I think he's another guy that you can kind of give a look to. He's not my favorite first baseman on the day, but I do think you get him lower owned. You'd probably get him much lower owned if you didn't put up like 45 fantasy points and have a monster game yesterday. But I do think he's somebody that could be sneaky, because most people will just say, oh, it's a lefty, we can't play a lefty against a lefty. But he's actually good in those lefty-on-lefty situations, so it's not a horrible play. Another game we can look at here, Texas versus the LA Angels. You got Matt Schumacher going up for the Angels. He's a guy, his numbers were pretty decent last year with the exception of home runs allowed. Gave up 24 home runs in 134 innings pitched. So if you're going to look at anybody on this Texas team, I think you want to look at the guys that are home run hitters. Now, first guy that would pop up, lefty-righty matchup, Prince Fielder. But Fielder didn't really show a lot of power last year. He still had a pretty good WOBA. He still hit the ball pretty well, but his ISO score was pretty low. Did not jack out a lot of home runs. Did have a bunch of doubles. Did still get some RBIs. Still had a high on base. Still had a decently high batting average. But again, I don't think he's the guy that you're looking at if you're really looking to get a guy that can jack out a home run for you. Adrian Beltre is very likely that guy. But again, righty-on-righty matchup, a little bit tougher. Beltre is good in righty-on-righty matchups, though. So I think that, it's a decent spot for him. Also, don't hate Sin-Soo Choo, who also has pretty good numbers as a left-handed bat going up against right-handers. So those would be the 3 guys that I'd look to target. The game in Texas would be a little bit better. It's a better hitter's ballpark. But, Anaheim plays pretty neutral. So I think that it's still a decent spot for these guys, although I wouldn't go overboard trying to get them in my lineups. Now, on the other side of this game, we have A.J. Griffin. He was last seen in baseball in 2014 pitching for the Oakland A's, and he actually did pretty well. He pitched 200 innings that year, only had about a 220 batting average allowed. But his problem was he gave up 36 home runs in 200 innings pitched. So basically we're talking, 18 home runs every 100 innings. Basically almost 2 home runs per 9 innings that he was giving up. So I think you got to look at the right-handed bats with some power on that Angels team. Mike Trout, 408 WOBA, 292 ISO, righty-on-righty situations. Albert Pujols, 340 WOBA, 230 ISO. So, he's another guy that has the home run potential to jack out a home run here against Griffin. I don't think Griffin's a very good pitcher. I want to see him do it again before I, stop taking bats against him. He wasn't, like I said, he wasn't horrible when he pitched for the A's a couple years ago, but he was also pitching in Oakland, and it was a guy who gave up a lot of home runs. So even though they didn't have a high batting average against him, he did still get rocked for a decent amount of runs, because when he does get hit, he seems to get hit hard. So that's the kind of upside play that we want to look for in tournaments today. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice here a little bit. All right, so next game we're going to talk about Oakland. We got Oakland at Seattle. Taijuan Walker is pitching for Seattle. He was really good at home last year, a little bit worse on the road. Had about a 250 batting average to each side of the plate with a whip of 1.20. Gave up about a home run every 7 innings. So he's solid, although not spectacular. But he's facing a pretty weak Oakland lineup. I mean, Oakland's been rolling out Josh Reddick as the third batter against right-handed pitching, and he hasn't hit a lick so far this year. He's got guys like Jed Lowry in front of him. Billy Burns, who's, really more of just a get on base and steal kind of guy. They're hitting guys like Billy Butler and Danny Valencia in the 4, 5, 6 holes right there. So, I mean, this is not a lineup that should scare you all that much. I think Taijuan Walker is somebody who does have a little bit of sneaky upside there. Make sure you check out the pitching reports that, some of our fellow contributors at RotoCurve put up. But for my money, I think I'm going to have some shares of Walker tonight, which also means I'm probably not going to have any shares of that Oakland offense. Now, for the other side, we have this guy, Surkamp, who used to be a Dodger, is going to be pitching today for Oakland. He's a left-handed pitcher. Right-handed bats have done well against him, but we don't have a very big sample size, limited innings pitched. But the fact that he's a lefty and the fact that he struggles against righties pretty much screams to me that I want to use Nelson Cruz here today. 459 WOBA, 315 ISO whenever he faces left-handed pitching. This is a guy that just absolutely mashes lefties, has a ton of power, makes contact, very, very good player. Definitely somebody that I want to have exposure to in both my cash games and GPPs tonight. The other right-handed bat on that Seattle team that I look at whenever they face a lefty, cheap option for you, Franklin Gutierrez. He had a 411 WOBA, 298 ISO last year against left-handed pitching. So I love Cruz. He's the guy that I'm willing to pay up for, but I think that Franklin Gutierrez, even though he hasn't had a hot start to the season, is somebody else that we want to look at whenever he's going up against a left-handed pitcher. Next game we can talk about, we got the LA Dodgers against the San Francisco Giants. You got Matt Cain pitching for San Francisco. Now, in 2015, he was a little banged up. He only pitched 60 innings, had a batting average allowed against of 300. So guys were really teeing off on him, and he gave up 12 home runs as well. So a home run, about 1 every 5 innings. Left-handed bats have always done better against him, and that's bad news for him against this Dodger team. Now, San Francisco is not a very good hitter's ballpark, so it's not really a place that I think we want to be, targeting most of the time. But again, with as bad as Cain has been, I do think this is a spot that you can look at him. So let's go through that Dodger order. You probably have Chase Utley leading off playing second base. I think he's in play. He's a guy that hits right-handed pitching pretty well, definitely has a little bit of power, so he fits the profile. Corey Seager with the, his over 400 WOBA and over almost 300 ISO last season when he got called up. Somebody that hits right-handed pitching extremely well, left-handed bat, young kid, going to be a superstar in this league one day. Think he's somebody else that's in play. Justin Turner, righty-on-righty matchups, did very well last year, so he's somebody you can look at as well. Although just be careful, because yesterday, Yasiel Puig, who I also like here in righty-on-righty matchups, Puig was hitting in the 3-hole. I think Turner either got the day off or was moved down in the order. So I'm interested to see if they do keep Puig up there in the 3-hole or if they move him back down. I like Puig. He's another guy righty-on-righty that does very well. So I think he's, somebody we can look at. Adrian Gonzalez, obviously the left-handed bat, 360 WOBA, ISO over like 240, I think, last year. So he has power. He can also hit pretty well. I think he's somebody else that we want. So basically all these Dodger bats are in play. I think it's another good stack that you can stack up. I wish it was a better ballpark, but Matt Cain is that bad of a pitcher that I think this is going to be a high-scoring game. I think it's going to be high-scoring because we also have a guy named Stripling going up on the other side for the Dodgers. This is a guy that's stepping up from Double-A, and it's not like his numbers were lights out in Double-A. He's a right-handed pitcher going up against a very good offense here in San Francisco. So Denard Span leading off, I think, is in play. Joe Panic at second base behind them, another lefty who's been hitting right as well. I think he's in play. I think Buster Posey is one of the better catcher options, even though it's a righty-on-righty matchup. Almost every day I like Posey in there. He's just so consistent, so solid, and has a solid upside for a catcher. And then a guy who I've been talking about and using a lot early in the season here. Brandon Belt. I'm a big fan of Brandon Belt. I think he's a pretty good player. He can hit. He can run a little bit. He's got a little bit of power. So he basically does it all, can fill up a stat sheet for you. And if he's going to be hitting in the 4 and 5 spot in that order, definitely think he's somebody that I'm going to want to have some exposure to. So that wraps it up for the 10 late games that we have tonight. Thank you for joining us here at the Benny's Bet section. Be sure to get over to rotocurve.com and sign up for an account. This way you can join in on all the action. Everything over there is free. So, you guys have access to all the information that all the contributors that we have. We got 5 or 6 guys now working over there, doing some work for us on MLB. So you'll have access to all their stuff, be able to see what, what they're looking at and what they're doing. And, also which guys that they like on any given day. Now, remember, tonight we do also have the Daily Pivot Show going off between 5 and 6. Come over to rotocurve.com. You'll have myself, Josh Kalachi, Ricky Sanders host. Nick Mencio comes over from Roto World as well to contribute for us. A couple guys, a lot of guys that play a lot of daily fantasy. We all play on different sites as well. I know Ricky's big over on Fantasy Draft. Nick does a lot of stuff over on FanDuel. Josh and I play on both, but obviously I do a lot of stuff over on DraftKings. So you'll get a different perspective from everybody. You'll also get some value plays on each site because, let's face it, the pricing is what really matters, and the pricing is different all over. So like I said, I'm looking at DraftKings prices all day, and Ricky's looking at Fantasy Draft stuff. Nick and Josh are both looking at a lot of the stuff over on FanDuel. So whatever site you play on, we should be able to give you some advice and help you out. And, a lot of the talk that we have too is just stuff about, this guy's in a good spot, that guy's in a good spot. And, you need to know which guys you want to play and which guys you want to shy away from when you're building your lineup. So make sure to come over and check us out between 5 and 6 on the Daily Fantasy Pivot here at rotocurve.com. And thank you guys for joining us for the Benny's Bat section this morning. And as always, stay classy, DFS.